it doesn't matter. So we got to rip this Band-Aid all the way off and understand whether you work in a fast food restaurant or in the White House, whether you work in Hollywood or you work at the local landfill, the men who have power over your careers many times abuse that power. And to end this abuse, it's absolutely necessary that other men begin to speak up and stand up, to show some courage and some dignity, to intervene, to condemn. Because, gentlemen, as I said earlier, your silence is complicity. The only way we're going to change the culture is if everyone takes a stand. Because look, the vast majority of men in America are not abusers. The overwhelming majority are not abusers. But until they are labeled, the abusers are labeled the pariah that they are, this cultural phenomenon is going to continue. I imagine this audience, some of you know what the phrase rule of thumb means. How many know what it is? Raise your hand. You're one of the few audiences. Back in the 1300s, late 1300s in England, the courts of common law, too many women were being killed by their husbands who chastised them because they were property, allowed to chastise, quote, your woman. The court came along and said, we're not going to outlaw you chastising your woman, but you can no longer chastise your woman with a rod bigger than the circumference of your thumb. This is a cultural problem, endemic in our culture that still hasn't been wiped out. But we have a chance now. Unlike any time in history, we have a chance. That's why I wrote The Violence Against Women 28 years ago. If you doubt this is a national matter, let me explain what happened when I first sat down and wrote that legislation. I was told, first of all, that no one would pay attention. Initially, not a single women's group supported me. National Organization of Women, any women's group, because they thought it would draw attention away from abortion rights and gender rights. I put my progressive credentials alongside anybody. I'm the guy who said, I don't need to evolve. I think men should be able to marry men and women should be able to marry women. And I believe that since I've been 13 years old when I was with my father and he turned and looked at me as I watched two men kiss. And I looked at my dad. Excuse me, I was 17 years old. I looked at my dad and he said, Joey, it's simple. They love each other. So I take a back seat to no one on my progressive values. But, initially, I got no support. Although others had tried, they had never gotten anywhere in legislation. And so, finally, because of a brave, bright woman who's the head of NOW, National Organization of Women, Ellie Schmiel, she finally went at a conference of all the 7 major women's groups, civil rights groups in the country. She said, what are we doing? Why aren't we helping this guy? And everything began to change. When the Violence Against Women Act, for example, contained women's shelters for women who are being abused, they were characterized in the mainstream press as Biden was setting up indoctrination centers for women's lib. This is 20-some years ago. I was told by most conservative clerics and very conservative religious groups that I was interfering in family matters. The government had no right to interfere It was a family matter. It was private. I guess I caused some problems when I said we're going to rip the Band-Aid off. The dirty little secret that your parents, and my parents, we all knew was going on. And so, in order to get this moving, I knew we had to do what you young women did today. I knew we had to go out and find some truly brave women who would stand before the country and the nation and before my committee and say what happened to them, knowing what would follow on and happen to them. One of the first people to come forward, and I sat with her before to warn her what would happen to her, was a beautiful in every way, inside and out, model named Marla Hanson from New York. She lived in an apartment complex. She wanted to go from an efficiency to a one-bedroom apartment. Every time she'd go to her landlord, he'd hit on her. So finally, she left the complex. It was I think in the East 80s in Manhattan, a very upscale complex. She was on shoot one day in New York, got notice she kept trying to get her security deposit back. He said, if you come back to the restaurant bar after work, which is in the bottom of the apartment complex, I'll give it to you. She came back, he hit on her again. She got up and walked out. He'd hired 2 thugs. You know what they did? They slashed her face with razors. I asked her, what did your girlfriend say? They said, what were you wearing? What did your mother say? Why did you go to a bar? Brilliant young woman who went to a small Catholic college just north of Pittsburgh. Freshman. My second witness. There was no football team, but a soccer team, and so they had a bonfire for the first game on Friday night for the first game on Saturday. Pep rally. She went to the rally. It was cold, and she was going back to her dorm. It was dark, and a boyfriend of a girl she went to high school with back home said, I'll walk you back to your dorm. On the way to the dorm, he said, can I stop and get my coat out of my dorm? She walked in with him, he pulled her in her room, and he raped her. I'll never forget what she said. She said, I went running back to my room. I was on the 4th floor. I ran in and ran up, took all my clothes off, and ran in the bathroom, took a scalding shower. I'll never forget the phrase. She said, I took a scalding shower. Came out, I was sitting at the end of my bed crying, and my RA came in. A woman said, what happened? I said, I told her. She said, you've been raped. And I said, no, I knew him. I knew him. Think of the cultural saturation that would have a brilliant young woman say, no, it's not the same. I knew him. The idea that someone wasn't leaping out of an alley and brutally raping her means it wasn't that serious? When in fact, all the psychiatrists and psychologists who testified in 1,000 hours of hearings I had and now is taken for granted, the most difficult abuse to recover from. The abuse of someone you know, at the hands of someone you know and someone you trust. That's harder to recover from than the same exact abuse by a total stranger. How many of you lovely young victims, men and women, have had someone say to you, well, what did you do? How many have asked themselves, what did I say? What did I do to provoke this? And that was one of the first things I had to try to overcome, to explain to people. It's never, and I mean it's not figuratively, literally, it's never, 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 never the woman's fault, no matter what she does. No, I'm being literal now. Let me make it clear. You can say, I want to go to bed with you and get in bed and change your mind. You can be the one. One of you could stand up here, strip stark naked, and walk down the middle of here, and no man has a right to touch you. You can be arrested for indecent exposure, but nobody has a right to touch you. Period. No, I mean it literally. And by the way, unless consent can be given, it is a crime. It is a flat crime. But all these women went through the vicious court of public opinion. They got judged and rejudged. But they had the courage to come forward. Then Nita Hill came forward, knowing that she would be pilloried for saying she had been harassed. But because of brave women like this, they began to break down the barrier, encouraging other women to step up. It took enormous courage to begin to change this environment. But we're still having trouble at the time to getting this bill passed. So we had to make another point to show how embedded this prejudice was. Brilliant young staff I had in the Judiciary Committee decided to do something called go out and look at the laws in every single state that dealt with violence against women. My state of Delaware is a progressive state. In the state of Delaware, there's a law that said, if God forbid, you're walking down an alley, a street tonight, and somebody jumps out of an alley and brutally rapes you. In my state, you can be charged with first-degree rape. But if a guy you go out on a date with does the exact same thing to you, you cannot be charged with first-degree rape. Implicit in the culture is you must have known something. You must have done something to trigger it. Imagine that. Same exact physical abuse. But if you knew him, in one state, the law was if a man came home and found his wife in bed with another man, he could shoot. It was justified homicide. If a woman came home and found her husband in bed with another woman, it was murder. We dissected 50 states. My colleagues looked and said, oh, God, I didn't know this. But again, think of the cultural norms built into these unfair laws. People started to pay attention. We made a lot of progress. We made a lot of progress since the passage of the bill. Violence against women is down 63%. More women are reporting the crime and getting help. The law has built more than 2,000 domestic violence shelters and rape centers. Every state in the union, almost every city, there's hundreds of laws now to protect victims, and every major city has a special victims unit, trained detectives and advocates. We've saved the country by every serious study, an estimated $12 billion in aggravated social cost. Made a lot of progress. When I got elected vice president, the president asked me, did I have any requests? I said, yeah, I want the Violence Against Women's Office, which is in the Justice Department, to come in under my control as vice president. Because the attorney generals were generous, they didn't object, so I hired the people who were going to run this operation. And I kept tabs on from the Bureau of Justice Statistics, reports all crimes. What kind of progress we're making. And Cynthia Hogan, a brilliant lawyer, she's the one that the NFL ended up hiring after that jerk dragged his wife out of the elevator by the hair. By the way, 5 years earlier, no one would have done anything about it. Because of you and a lot of other people think that society is changing. So she went over and checked out the progress. She came back with information that just absolutely stunned me. Yeah, we made a lot of progress, except for girls and women between the ages of 14 and 24, but virtually no progress. The statistics even more alarming, since in the meantime we learned, we knew, God forbid, if you're raped or abused once, you are 3 times as likely to be raped and abused a second time. You know the statistics. 1 in 5 women in college will be sexually assaulted. It's higher for transgender individuals and for bisexual women. And it's not over when the attacks end. Rape and sexual assault have long-lasting effects. When I wrote the bill, I said I believe there's women who suffer traumatic encounters of attacks from one they know or don't know are going to suffer from post-traumatic stress just like the military does. Everybody thought I was making it up just to make my case. The Center for Disease Control 2 years ago wrote an extensive study showing that's exactly right. Traumatic stress, post-traumatic stress syndrome, a greater disposition to chronic health problems, weakening your immune system, higher rates of heart disease. Victims have much higher ratios of chronic disease like asthma, diabetes, gastrointestinal disorders. But here's the thing. We decided, what are we going to do about this? I mean, I was devastated. I was so proud of what we had done. I would have thought generationally it would have been much different. But it wasn't. And I believe for a long time, although I'm a great supporter of higher education, I believe for a long time, college presidents and administrators are turning a blind eye to what their obligation is. So I went to Arne Duncan, the Secretary of Education. We decided we're going to use Title IX. Your universities get hundreds of millions of dollars from the federal government. Title IX says we have to treat men like women. They have an obligation to protect you on campus. We ended up bringing before us over 158 universities. We found out that the university was doing the same thing, and some of you had this experience. You go to report to the university what happened, and you'll have an administrator say to you, well, what were you wearing? Were you drunk? Where was it? Was it at a fraternity? Did you know them? The most educated sector of the populace committing the same cultural problems that were happening, that we had learned through women's shelters that were just wrong to begin with. I had a meeting with 100 college presidents. I pushed hard to tell them they have to change what happens on their campus. You have to have your own victims unit on campus. You have to have people trained when a young woman comes forward. I'll bet if I went through this crowd, you can give me examples where one reported through university, you've been told, you don't want to ruin this young man's career. You don't want to throw him out of school. You know, if you cheat on an exam, I'm a college professor now, and I taught in law school for 21 years. If I have someone cheating on an exam, they can get thrown out of school for that. I don't have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt to the jury that you cheated, but by the preponderance of evidence. So now you have a new Secretary of Education undoing all the limitations on colleges and requirements put on college, Secretary DeVos, because somehow there should be a standard that's in the law beyond a reasonable doubt. Second thing I did was to reach out to college students and high school students with a virtual town meeting. I was told there were over 30,000 people on the first call. And I asked, what recommendations do you have for me is what we can do to make things safer for you? And I thought I was pretty informed. But I was almost embarrassed I hadn't focused on what they had said. I gave them a website to go to, and the overwhelming spontaneous response from these 30,000 students was, get men involved. Such a simple, self-evident notion. Men on campus have to take more responsibility to change the culture. So I called up athletes and celebrities, guys like David Beckham, the great soccer player, and others, and I asked them to appear with me in a series of public service announcements that were played at major sporting events, the Final Four, a whole range of issues. And then the President and I launched a thing called It's On Us. Going to college camps, I've been to scores. The crowd show up like this, somewhere between 2,000 and 5,000 show up. And I asked the men in the audience to take the pledge, a literal pledge, to stand up, to speak up. I called on all of you, and you're already doing it, I assume, you men that are here, to step up at the bar or the fraternity party or in the dorm room when you hear denigrating discussion about women. Most of you in college wouldn't stand for it here in denigrating discussions about African Americans or about Asians, because it breeds this contempt. You've been in more locker rooms than I have, but all this stuff about you hear this in locker rooms, you don't hear it in locker rooms. But you got to speak up. Look, we've gotten celebrity, major companies, sports leagues, leading broadcasters to participate and show everyone can help prevent this heinous crime from happening. We've held over 3,300 events on campus in every state in this union in the last several years. Schools have created their own It's On Us public service announcements, reaching millions of people online, at football games, basketball games, sporting events. Tomorrow at the Army-Navy men's and women's basketball games at West Point, we'll be featuring It's On Us. More than 440,000 students have taken the pledge I've asked them to take so far, that they will intervene when they see it. 2 years ago, Lady Gaga, who was brutally victimized, she's come out with what's happened to her, finally. Not finally, but I mean, she's had the courage to do it. She wrote a song, Until It Happens to You, was nominated for the Academy Award. She asked me if I would introduce her at the Academy Awards and talk about this issue in the introduction for a few minutes. over 210 million people worldwide responded. 210 million. And millions more began to, hundreds of thousands more took the pledge. So I'm here with you today because fraternities are a significant source of the solution and the problem. And the problem. I'm not going to color this because you're all here. Any of you guys, and you've seen it, see a freshman co-ed at a party, drunk out of her mind, one of your brothers or roommates walking her up the stairs. If you do not intervene, you are a coward. You are complicitous. And ladies, that's not an easy thing for a man to do, because sometimes intervening with someone is twice their size. Not a joke. If you can't physically intervene, at least sound the alarm. And you women, you sorority sisters, you know the deal. The person most often gone to by a victim immediately after it happens is one of her friends. And not nearly enough of you are helpful. You empathize, you sympathize, you either don't know what to tell her to do, or you don't want to get involved in encouraging her to go forward to do what she has to do. You have an obligation, the same obligation these men have, to get engaged. I could hear in the back, not clearly, but some of it went on, you all talking. You guys have to raise hell on your campus if your campus does not have adequate protection and or adequate recourse on the campus. You have to speak up. Go to the president of the university. Go to the administrators. Insist that. Because that's what's going to change it. You both have obligations. I know you want to be the best brothers and sisters you could possibly be. This is part of the deal. Folks, it comes down to a simple proposition. We have to change the culture on campuses and in society as a whole. And what's acceptable. We have to change the standard of decency by which we measure ourselves. Is not or cannot be given. It's a crime. It's rape. This isn't abstract. These are your friends, your brothers, your sisters. In some cases, your literal blood sisters and blood brothers. This is about the women, the men, the gay, the straight, the transgender classmate down the hall, in your dorm, in your classes, on your team. It's about the high school girl who hasn't yet shown up on campus and is dreaming about her first semester on college. That dream could be shattered forever unless you change the environment on college campuses. Ask your parents, the first day they dropped you off on your college campus, what did they most worry about? They worried about you're going to be able to do the work? They're able to worry about whether or not you're going to like it? That may be a little bit of it. But they ask themselves, in an environment that should be the safest in the world, is she going to be safe? Is she going to be safe? Look, folks, I apologize I get so engaged in this. But here's the deal. We have an obligation to get engaged. As I said, it isn't abstract, it's real. And this is one of the most encouraging things that I've seen. 4,000 of you around the country here deciding you're going to take hold by taking the very institutions which in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s were viewed as the biggest part of the problem. You're going to use them as the biggest engine for solution. We have an ambitious plan for It's On Us this year. Our Greek Leadership Council is made up of 12 organizations that are leading sexual assault prevention nationwide. And I want to ask the members of that organization to stand and be recognized. All of you who are part of that organization that are here today, stand and be recognized. Come on, stand up, man. We need you. We need more of you. The Greek Leadership Council is going to challenge students in the Greek life to do better. These fraternities and sororities, brothers and sisters, are hopefully going to be leading the charge so that when you're sending your child to college, the last thing you have to worry when you drop her off is whether she's going to be physically safe, any more than she'd be physically safe walking the streets of her hometown. So, ladies and gentlemen, I really think we have a chance for the first time since I've been engaged in this to begin to change the culture. Things that are happening now would have never happened even 5, 10 years ago. Would have never even made the press. I really mean it. People are now going, I guess I gotta look. I can't pretend it's not happening anymore. Because the vast majority of women and men are decent and honorable. But the only way we're going to put a stop to it. And by the way, I'll conclude by saying there's never going to be an end to violence. Ralph Waldo Emerson once said, society's like a wave. The wave moves on, but the particles remain the same. God's not made a new brand of man or woman in a millennium. But the press always asks me, Biden, you've been fighting this fight for over 35 years. What constitutes success? I can tell you what success is, and it's within our reach. Success is when a woman who is abused never, ever, ever asked herself, what did I do? Never asked herself, what did I do? And when every man in America never asks himself, I have a right to do this, don't I? She's my woman. She's your equal. She is as relevant as you are. So, folks, the biggest change is we're shifting. When women speak up now, society is listening. And instead of dismissing, they're giving the benefit of the doubt. That's a gigantic change. Keep it going. And it's all about your kids being able to look back. This sounds corny. But look back at you 25 years from now and say, they did it. They did it. Thank you. Thank you.